They laughed when she entered the conference room, not because of a joke, but because disbelief was easier than respect. In their eyes, she was an interloper, a face they had already decided did not belong. Dr. Naomi Carter felt the sting like a sudden slap, sharp, invisible, but no less real. She had worn her white coat like armor for years, but that morning it felt more like a target. No one in the bustling corridors of Eastbrook City Hospital knew her true assignment. As far as they were concerned, she was merely another visiting physician, a newcomer to be quietly tested, perhaps quietly broken. The city outside shimmered with a deceptive autumn sunlight, but inside these walls, prejudice simmered like an unspoken contagion. Naomi had seen it before, patients doubting her credentials, colleagues talking over her expertise, but today the stakes were heavier. A series of patient complaints and unexplained injuries had drawn federal attention. She had been sent not only as a doctor, but as the chief federal medical director, tasked with investigating the hospital's troubling pattern of racial bias in patient care and staff treatment. The irony was bitter. The very people she had come to observe were already displaying the exact disease she was here to diagnose. From the moment she stepped onto the emergency floor, Naomi sensed a subtle choreography of exclusion. A nurse's curt nod instead of a greeting, a resident who avoided eye contact, an attending physician whose handshake tightened when he finally offered it. They were small gestures, but together they painted a mural of quiet hostility. When she asked for patient charts, the clerk couldn't find them. When she requested a meeting with department heads, schedules suddenly conflicted. It was a performance as old as power itself: deny access, question competence, then pretend it's all a misunderstanding. Naomi recognized the script. She had been handed the same lines too many times before. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Federal Oversight Office. Find concrete evidence. Two junior doctors, both white, both young, were discussing an elderly black patient whose chart showed delayed treatment. Their laughter was soft, but the words cut deep. You know how they exaggerate pain, one said, as though quoting a tired medical myth. Naomi felt a surge of heat rise in her chest. Her professional training told her to remain calm, to document, to gather facts. But her humanity, her heart ached for confrontation. She wrote every word in her hidden notebook, each stroke of her pen both a record and a defiance. As days passed, the tension thickened. The hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Richard Hanley, a man whose silver hair and polished shoes projected authority, began to notice Naomi's quiet persistence. He invited her to a casual chat in his spacious corner office. The sunlight through the tall windows spilled golden warmth across the mahogany desk, but the air was cool with suspicion. You've been asking a lot of questions, he said, his smile polite but tight. Naomi met his gaze with steady calm. I'm here to learn, she replied simply. Hanley leaned back, tapping a pen against the desk. Learn quickly, he warned, and tread carefully. We have our own ways of doing things here. Naomi walked out of the office with her pulse racing. It was not merely a warning. It was a line drawn in sand. Yet behind her composed exterior, she felt a quiet, rising fire. Every attempt to intimidate her only confirmed the depth of the rot she had come to expose. She knew that prejudice often wore a friendly mask, and in Eastbrook City Hospital, the mask was beginning to slip. Her resolve deepened when she met Mrs. Lillian Harris, a 68-year-old black woman admitted for complications of diabetes. Mrs. Harris's voice trembled as she recounted how her requests for pain relief had been dismissed for hours, her concerns waved away as overreacting. Naomi held her hand, listening, promising nothing but understanding. When she left the room, she carried not just the patient's story but the weight of generations who had endured the same quiet cruelty. Night after night, Naomi reviewed records, noting patterns, disparities in treatment times, discrepancies in prescribed medications, subtle delays in emergency responses for patients of color. Each entry tightened the knot of anger in her chest, but also strengthened her commitment. She had come here under the guise of a visiting physician, but she would not leave until the truth was undeniable. The hospital staff began to whisper. Some sensed that Naomi's presence was more than temporary. A few, brave or simply fed up, approached her in hushed tones, sharing their own observations of bias and neglect. A young nurse slipped her a stack of internal emails, each one a quiet indictment. Another resident, her voice shaking, confided that she had been reprimanded for over-prioritizing black patients. Naomi thanked them all, her gratitude wrapped in the promise of anonymity. Still, not everyone remained subtle. One evening, as Naomi left the hospital parking garage, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Go back where you belong." She turned sharply, her heart hammering, but the corridor was empty. Only the echo of Prejudice remained, lingering like smoke. Naomi inhaled slowly, letting the fear harden into focus. She refused to be driven away. Her final report would not just be a collection of data. It would be a mirror held up to an institution that had long avoided seeing itself. But before she could deliver it, she needed one last piece of evidence, an undeniable moment that even the most skeptical federal board could not dismiss. She knew it would come. Prejudice, like infection, eventually revealed itself in unmistakable symptoms. When it did, she would be ready. Naomi barely slept that night, her mind a restless current of numbers and faces and unspoken accusations. At dawn, the city woke under a soft amber glow, the same golden hue that always made her think of renewal, and she told herself it was a sign. The truth would not stay buried forever. She arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, walking the quiet corridors while the first shift of nurses gathered charts. Their voices were low, their glances quick, as if the building itself sensed the tension that had been building like pressure behind a locked door. Naomi greeted them with a calm nod, concealing the sleepless night behind the crisp collar of her white coat. She moved toward the medical records department, where an aide named Carla, petite woman with tired eyes, waited with a nervous energy that betrayed the gravity of their meeting. Carla had texted Naomi after midnight, a simple message, "I found something." Now she clutched a manila folder as though it were a lifeline. "I shouldn't even have this," Carla whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "But you need to see it." Naomi opened the folder to a series of internal memos and treatment logs, each sheet a quiet revelation of systemic neglect. It was there in black and white. Repeated delays in administering pain medication to patients of color, unexplained cancellations of diagnostic tests for Black and Latino patients, even casual notes that implied baseless assumptions about drug-seeking behavior. Naomi's chest tightened. She had been collecting fragments for days, but this was a completed puzzle. "Carla, you understand what this means?" she asked softly. Carla nodded, her lips pressed thin. "It means they can't pretend anymore." Naomi reached out, touching Carla's arm in gratitude. "I'll protect your name," she promised. Carla exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for months. "Just make sure it changes something," she said, and slipped back into the morning bustle. Naomi tucked the folder into her bag and headed to the cafeteria for coffee, needing the bitter taste to ground her. Across the room, she spotted Dr. Richard Hanley, the hospital administrator, standing like a sentinel of authority. His silver hair caught the morning light, but his expression was dark. He was speaking with two department heads, his gestures sharp, his eyes scanning the room as though hunting for an intruder. When his gaze settled on Naomi, it lingered just long enough to feel like a warning. She held his stare, refusing to blink first. He smiled faintly, but it carried no warmth. By mid-morning, Naomi was summoned to a meeting in the staff conference room. The email invitation was brief, no agenda, no explanation. She entered to find Hanley at the head of the table, flanked by senior physicians and administrators. The room smelled of freshly printed reports and quiet hostility. "Dr. Carter," Hanley began with the sort of politeness that hides a blade. "Concerns have been raised about your methods. Some staff feel you've been unnecessarily critical and disruptive." He slid a sheet of paper across the table. "We'd like you to sign an acknowledgement of hospital protocol and a commitment to cooperative conduct." Naomi read the document, her pulse quickening. It was a trap, a vague agreement that would limit her ability to question practices and gather evidence. She looked up, meeting Hanley's expectant gaze. "I'm here to provide the best care for patients," she said evenly, "and to understand how this hospital serves its community. Cooperation works both ways." Hanley's smile thinned. "Then you will sign?" "No," Naomi said, her voice clear and steady. "I will not." A ripple of discomfort moved around the table. Someone coughed, another shifted in his chair. Hanley's jaw tightened. "Be careful, doctor. Refusing to follow our procedures can have consequences." Naomi closed the folder she'd brought, the one filled with Carla's documents. Consequences, she repeated softly. Yes, I understand those very well. The meeting ended without resolution. Naomi left with her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. She knew that open confrontation carried risks, but silence carried far greater ones. Outside, the golden afternoon light flooded through the high windows of the hallway, bathing the sterile white walls in a glow that felt almost defiant. Later that day, Naomi visited Mrs. Harris again. The elderly woman's eyes brightened when she saw her. "Doctor, you look tired," Mrs. Harris said, her voice warm with maternal concern. Naomi smiled gently. "I've been busy." She took the woman's hand, the simple human connection grounding her more than any report ever could. "I need to ask you something important," Naomi said quietly. "Would you be willing to describe how you were treated when you first came in? In detail?" Mrs. Harris nodded without hesitation. "People need to know," she said. Naomi recorded the testimony on her phone, each word a testament to the quiet suffering too many patients endured. When she finished, Mrs. Harris squeezed her hand. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop," the older woman whispered. "We've waited too long for someone to speak for us." Naomi felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. As evening approached, Naomi's phone buzzed again. A text from the Federal Oversight Office. "Progress report needed. Deadline approaching." She typed a quick reply. "I have the evidence. Preparing final documentation." Then she paused, staring at the screen. She had the proof, but to make it undeniable, she needed to show the system unmasked in real time. That opportunity arrived sooner than she expected. Near midnight, a commotion erupted in the emergency department. Naomi rushed down the corridor to find a young black man in obvious pain, clutching his abdomen. His mother stood beside him, pleading for help. A triage nurse barely looked up from her clipboard. "You'll have to wait," she said curtly. "We're short-staffed." The boy groaned, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Naomi stepped forward. "He needs immediate evaluation," she said firmly. The nurse frowned. "We're handling it, doctor," she replied with a hint of annoyance. Naomi glanced at the chart in the nurse's hand and saw the faint scribble of a note. Possible exaggeration of symptoms. Her stomach turned. "Page surgery," Naomi ordered. The nurse hesitated. "That's not your call." Naomi met her eyes, her voice like steel. "It is when a patient's life is at risk." She turned to the mother. "I'll take care of him." Minutes later, an imaging scan revealed acute appendicitis on the verge of rupture. The boy was rushed to surgery just in time. Naomi documented every second, every delayed response, every dismissive remark. She knew this case undeniable and immediate would pierce through any bureaucratic fog. When the operation was complete and the boy stabilized, Naomi found herself standing alone in the quiet corridor. The golden glow of the hospital's nighttime lights reflected on the polished floors like a promise. She took a deep breath. The evidence was now both written and lived. Back in her temporary office, she compiled the final report. Carla's documents, Mrs. Harris's testimony, the recorded incident in the emergency room, all meticulously organized. She attached photographs, timestamps, and direct quotes. Each page was a blade of truth, sharp enough to cut through the thickest denial. When she finished, she pressed send. Moments later, a soft chime confirmed the transmission. Naomi leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her like a heavy tide. She knew the storm was coming: investigations, hearings, perhaps public outrage. But she also knew that change never arrived without resistance. For the first time in days, Naomi allowed herself a small, quiet smile. The hospital could no longer hide behind its polished facade. The golden light of morning would reveal everything. Naomi awoke before dawn, the faint orange of sunrise bleeding into the city skyline like a quiet signal that something irreversible had begun. Overnight, her report had reached the Federal Oversight Board. By morning, the ripples were already spreading. Her phone was alive with alerts, some from colleagues thanking her in cautious tones, others from unknown numbers issuing thinly veiled threats. She silenced the device and stood by the hotel window, watching the city breathe beneath a golden haze. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of her role as more than an investigator. She had become a catalyst, and catalysts were rarely welcomed. At the hospital, tension carried a visible edge. Conversations hushed when she entered. A few nurses nodded with a gratitude they dared not speak aloud. Others turned away, their faces a mixture of fear and resentment. Naomi moved through the corridors like a storm cloud wrapped in calm. She was not there to bask in victory. She was there to ensure the truth was carried all the way through. In the main lobby, she spotted Carla near the information desk. The aide's shoulders were squared, but her eyes betrayed worry. "They know something," Carla murmured when Naomi approached. "People are saying administrators met late last night. Hanley's been making calls to the board." Naomi placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Whatever happens next, that doesn't change." Carla exhaled, her breath trembling. "I'm scared, doctor." Naomi squeezed her shoulder. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it. And you've already done that." Carla managed a small, shaky smile. Minutes later, a page rang across the hospital intercom. "Dr. Carter to the executive conference room." The words echoed like a summons. Naomi walked toward the elevators, her footsteps steady. Inside the conference room, she found the senior leadership assembled in a half circle. At the head of the table stood Richard Hanley, his silver hair immaculate, his expression carved from granite. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice coldly formal, "the board has received a troubling document, allegedly from you, accusing this hospital of systemic discrimination. We require an immediate explanation." Naomi set her bag on the table and met his gaze. "Not allegedly," she replied. "I sent it." A murmur rippled through the room. Hanley's jaw tightened. "You have made serious claims that could damage the reputation of this institution. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," Naomi said, her voice even but firm. "I've revealed what your patients have suffered for years. I have testimony, internal memos, and recorded incidents. The truth is not a weapon, it's a remedy." One of the board members, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "And who exactly authorized you to investigate us?" Naomi opened her folder and drew out a single sheet of federal letterhead. She laid it flat on the table, the official seal catching the room's overhead light. "I am the federal medical director assigned to audit this hospital's compliance with anti-discrimination regulations," she said. "My role was to observe without revealing my authority until the investigation was complete. It is now complete." Silence fell like a sudden storm. Hanley's face drained of color. For a moment, he looked less like a man of power and more like a cornered animal. "You deceived us," he whispered. "I held you accountable," Naomi corrected. The older woman on the board reached for the document, scanning it with a measured calm. "These findings will require immediate action," she said at last. Her gaze moved from Hanley to Naomi. "We will begin an independent review. Effective immediately." Hanley's voice sharpened with desperation. "This is a smear. Our hospital saves lives every day. We are being painted as villains by an outsider with an agenda." Naomi's eyes held his. "Lives are saved despite your negligence, not because of it. Prejudice is not an accident. It is a choice and one you have allowed to fester." The board member closed the folder. "Enough," she said. "The federal board will oversee the transition. Dr. Hanley, you are relieved of your administrative duties pending further investigation." The room erupted in low murmurs. Hanley took a step forward, his voice breaking. "You can't do this." But they already had. Naomi turned and walked out, the echo of her footsteps filling the corridor like a quiet drumbeat. Outside the conference room, a group of nurses and residents had gathered, drawn by rumor and instinct. As she passed, a young nurse met her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Others nodded silently, their expressions a fragile mix of relief and disbelief. By midday, the hospital buzzed with news of the leadership shakeup. Some staff members moved with a new lightness, as if a weight had been lifted. Others glared at Naomi with open resentment, their pride bruised by the exposure of truths long denied. Naomi accepted it all, the gratitude, the anger, the uneasy quiet that follows upheaval. Change, she knew, was never without cost. Later, in the recovery ward, she visited the young boy whose emergency surgery had revealed the hospital's deepest fault lines. He was awake now, his mother holding his hand. "You saved my son," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. Naomi shook her head gently. "He saved himself. I only made sure someone listened." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "People like us that were used to waiting, to being told our pain can wait. You didn't let them wait. Naomi felt a tightness in her throat, the kind that comes when gratitude is both humbling and overwhelming. No one should have to wait for dignity, she said softly. As evening settled, Naomi stepped outside the hospital for the first time that day. The city was awash in the warm gold of a setting sun, the light catching every window and turning the gray concrete into a mosaic of amber and fire. She drew a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Her phone buzzed once more, a message from the Federal Oversight Board. Your findings will lead to a nationwide review. We are grateful for your service. Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up at the glowing horizon. She thought of Carla, of Mrs. Harris, of the countless patients whose voices had been dismissed. The fight was not finished. Prejudice would not vanish overnight, but today a door had opened. For the first time in many weary weeks, Naomi allowed herself to feel something close to peace. The hospital behind her hummed with the uneasy rhythm of change, but ahead, the city gleamed in golden light, as if to remind her that truth, once revealed, could never again be hidden. Naomi remained outside for a long moment, letting the warm light settle over her like a benediction. The hospital's glass facade reflected the golden sunset, transforming steel and concrete into something almost tender. It struck her that change often began this way quietly, almost invisibly until suddenly it stood before everyone, impossible to deny. She inhaled slowly, the city's evening air carrying the faint scent of rain on asphalt. For the first time in months, she felt the hard knot in her chest loosen. But even as the light softened, she knew the work was only beginning. Exposing a wound was not the same as healing it. The board's intervention would shake the hospital, but the deeper sickness, the habits of thought, and the quiet prejudices would not disappear overnight. She had seen it before. Policy reforms without cultural change, public statements without private conviction. Tonight she allowed herself a brief rest, but tomorrow she would push again. Her phone rang. The number belonged to her supervisor at the Federal Oversight Office, Dr. Elaine Rowe, a woman whose measured voice usually carried the steadiness of a metronome. Tonight it carried something else, pride. Naomi, Elaine said without preamble, the board just briefed me. Your report is already being reviewed by the Department of Health. This will set precedent for hospitals nationwide. Naomi leaned against the railing, the city's lights flickering on one by one beneath the dusk. It's only a beginning, she replied. And beginnings matter, Elaine said. Take tonight to breathe. Tomorrow we strategize. Naomi smiled faintly. Thank you for trusting me. I trusted the truth, Elaine answered. And you never let it go unheard. After the call, Naomi slipped her phone back into her pocket and walked slowly toward her car. In the parking lot, a few staff members crossed her path. One, a young resident with dark circles under his eyes, paused. Dr. Carter, he said hesitantly. I'm sorry for the way some of us treated you. I didn't speak up when I should have. Naomi met his gaze, seeing not guilt but the raw beginning of understanding. Acknowledging it is the first step, she said gently. Now use what you've seen to do better for every patient. He nodded, the weight of the moment settling over him like a vow. Driving back to her hotel, Naomi thought of Mrs. Harris, of the boy with the ruptured appendix, of Carla whose quiet courage had given the investigation its backbone. Faces and voices threaded through her memory like a tapestry of resilience. For years she had carried the burden of being doubted, questioned, underestimated. Tonight that burden felt shared. The next morning the city woke to headlines. Federal medical director uncovers racial bias at Eastbrook City Hospital. The story spread quickly, local papers, national broadcasts, a surge of social media posts. Commentators debated the implications, community leaders demanded broader reforms, and patients who had long felt invisible found their experiences suddenly validated. Naomi returned to the hospital not as a hidden investigator, but as a visible force for accountability. News crews waited outside, their cameras catching the golden morning light that streamed through gaps in the cloud cover. She walked past them without pause. Her purpose was not the spotlight, but the slow, patient work of reconstruction. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The whispers were no longer suspicious but uncertain, as if the staff were collectively learning a new language of reckoning. Nurses who had once turned away now greeted her with cautious respect. Some physicians remained cold, but the brittle confidence that once shielded them had cracked. In a small conference room, Naomi met with a group of junior staff nurses, interns, residents who had requested guidance. Carla sat among them, her shoulders straighter now, her eyes bright. They spoke of training programs, of rewriting intake protocols, of creating a patient advocacy council. Their ideas were raw, sometimes clumsy, but full of urgency. Naomi listened, then offered quiet direction. This isn't about punishing everyone for the failings of a few, she told them. It's about building habits of equity. It's about making sure no one here, patient or staff, feels unseen or unheard again. Carla raised her hand. Do you think people can really change? Naomi considered the question. People can surprise you, she said. But change isn't a feeling. It's a practice. It's what you choose to do every day, especially when no one is watching. Over the following weeks, the hospital began to transform. Mandatory bias training sessions filled auditoriums once reserved for grand rounds. A new committee, half staff, half patient advocates, reviewed every complaint with fresh rigor. Policies around pain management and triage were rewritten to close the gaps Naomi's report had revealed. There was resistance, of course. Some longtime physicians grumbled about overreach, and a few quietly left rather than adapt. But others, surprising even themselves, embraced the change. One senior surgeon, once dismissive of Naomi's presence, approached her after a training session. I didn't think I needed this, he admitted. But I see now how easily I made assumptions. Thank you for forcing me to see it. Naomi accepted his words with a nod, not triumph, but quiet affirmation. The work was far from complete, yet each small step was proof that the culture could bend toward justice. Months later, on a soft spring afternoon, Naomi returned to Eastbrook City Hospital for a scheduled follow-up. The lobby now displayed a mural commissioned by local artists, a broad sweep of golden light breaking through dark clouds, the silhouettes of diverse patients and caregivers reaching toward one another. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Every life, every voice, equal in care." Naomi stood before the mural, the gold catching her reflection. Carla approached with a smile. What do you think? It's beautiful, Naomi said. And it's only the beginning. Carla's eyes softened. Because of you. Naomi shook her head gently. Because of all of us who refused to stay silent. She walked down the familiar corridor toward the patient rooms. In one, she found Mrs. Harris sitting up in bed, recovering from a routine checkup. The older woman beamed. Dr. Carter, look at this place now. They actually listen. Naomi sat beside her, a quiet joy rising like a tide. They're learning, she said. Mrs. Harris reached for her hand. You made them see us. Naomi held her gaze, the golden afternoon light filtering through the blinds like a promise. We made them see, she corrected softly. As she left the hospital later that day, Naomi paused at the doorway and looked back. The setting sun poured gold across the windows, the same luminous color that had greeted her on the day she arrived, though everything inside had changed. She thought of the boy whose life had been saved, of the countless patients who would no longer be dismissed, of the young resident who had whispered an apology. Prejudice had not vanished. It never did in a single stroke. But truth, once spoken, had a way of settling into the cracks of an institution and pushing, slowly but inexorably, toward the light. Naomi stepped into the evening, her heart steady. The golden sky stretched across the horizon like an open door, and for the first time she felt the future not perfect, not easy, but undeniably brighter waiting to be entered. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.